Hey everyone, Sam here. Thanks for joining me. I hope you're having a beautiful day wherever you are in the world. In this video, I'm going to show you how to paint this old barn that's set to a backdrop of a beautiful South Island, New Zealand landscape. Now, for any of you that follow my friend Andrew Tischler on YouTube as well, may have noticed that he also made a video painting this exact view. And the reason being was that we were at this location at the same time. The year was 2016 and we ran 2 plein air painting art tours, and when we were at this location we were actually scoping out locations to go painting outdoors a few days before the first tour started. So in this video, this is my interpretation of this scene. I've actually been meaning to paint this for quite a while. If you like this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. In the meantime, let's start the video. I'm painting on a 12-inch by 16-inch linen panel, and what this is a medium weave oil primed Belgian linen that's mounted to Baltic birch. And these panels I buy pre-made from a company called canvaspanels.com in the USA. They're really beautiful to paint on and I love that oil primed surface. So I begin sketching out my composition with burnt sienna mixed with a little bit of liquid, and as I'm using oil paint, the liquid serves to thin the paint and improve the flow, but it also has the added advantage of speeding up the drying time. Very useful if you want to get lots of paintings done. Now, even though I'm painting this in oils, you could just as easily paint this in acrylics, as all the principles of colours and values and colour mixing is exactly the same. Now, there's quite a bit of stuff going on in this painting, but for the purposes of this video, I'm just going to focus on painting the barn and making the barn look harmonious with the rest of the painting. Part of the problem with man-made objects is they can look out of place or unnatural with the rest of the landscape, so we want to keep these man-made objects, such as this barn, looking natural with the rest of the landscape. And the way we can do this is by using common colours throughout the painting. This goes a long way to achieving colour harmony and making a painting that reads well. As I'm sketching out the composition, I'll just go over the colours I'm using, which includes titanium white, burnt sienna, yellow oxide, but you could use yellow ochre, cadmium yellow, cadmium orange, quinacridone crimson, but you could use alizarin crimson instead, ultramarine blue, and phthalo green. With regards to brushes, I'm using a range of number 5, number 3 and number 2 flat brushes, number 3 filbert brushes, and number 1 and number 0 round brushes. I'm using Rosemary & Co brushes here from their classic range, and I've been using their brushes for years. They're really great brushes to use, and I've put a link in the description below if you want to buy brushes from them. They also ship worldwide as well. Now, when I begin a painting, whether I'm painting outdoors or in the studio, the first thing I look out for is where all the dark values and shadows are in the scene that I'm painting. Value refers to how light or dark a subject is, and painting the darks first I find makes it easier to then add the areas in light afterwards, and also get the saturation of the colour that you're using correct as well. As landforms recede into the distance, the value range narrows, so the darks are not as dark and also the lights are not as light. But we'll find our darkest darks and our lightest lights in the foreground, so we need to keep this in mind when we're creating atmospheric depth in our paintings. So I start off with the mountain in the background, which is largely in shadow, and I use a mix of ultramarine blue with burnt sienna to desaturate, a little titanium white to get the value that I want, and also a little bit of quinacridone crimson, and that just gives the mix a violet tint. I've also varied these colour mixtures a little bit just to get some different textures within the mountains. I've also used the same colours for the clouds, but with a lot more titanium white to make the value lighter. Clouds and sky are generally some of the lightest values you'll find in the landscape. As I move forward in the painting, I paint those shadows in the Lombardy poplar trees, and this is where we're going to find the darkest values in the scene, not only because in general trees are some of the darkest values to be found in the landscape, but also because it's in the foreground as well, so there's quite a lot of occlusion shadows within the tree canopies. So for this I mix ultramarine blue with a little bit of yellow oxide just to create a very dark blue-green. I use the same colour mixture for those trees in the midground, but with a little bit of titanium white added to make the value a bit lighter so that those trees sit within the midground. So next I'm blocking in the shadows within the barn, and the barn is mainly consisting of some neutral greys, some cool blues that are a metallic colour, and also some rusty reds in the roof, for example. So how can I keep the colours in the barn looking harmonious with the rest of the painting? Well, what I'm going to do is try and use common colours that I've already used elsewhere in the painting, and in this case mixing some blues and neutral greys, metallic colours and rust colours, I can actually use the same colours that I've used in the background mountains and the clouds. The walls of the barn that are in shadow are pretty much the same colour and value to those mountains in the background, with burnt sienna to desaturate, titanium white and a little quinacridone crimson. Then when it comes to painting the roof of that barn, I'm actually using the same colours but with a lot more burnt sienna in the mix. So that's going to be the dominant colour. There's still some titanium white and a little bit of ultramarine blue in the mix as well, just to take the edge off the red that's in the burnt sienna. For those gaps within the doors and windows of the barn, it's pretty much black, so I've mixed ultramarine blue with burnt sienna, which creates a near black, and this is because burnt sienna is a dark orange and orange is opposite to blue on the colour wheel, so we can create a very dark value here. So to recap, the barn is already going to sit nicely within the painting because the colours that I've used in the barn are the same colours that I've used in the background mountains and the clouds, albeit in different amounts. Now once I'd established all the main dark areas within the painting, I then worked back and then began working on adding the highlights within the clouds and then painting the sky. The sky is a simple mix of ultramarine blue with titanium white and a little bit of phthalo green. And then after that I begin working forward within the painting, working on the midground, which is largely in shadow, and I was keeping the colour mixtures pretty simple here. Then the next thing was to work on the Lombardy poplar trees in the foreground, as well as the areas of grass, which was a mix of green pale coloured grass and also some straw coloured grass, especially as the time of year is kind of midsummer, so the landscape's looking a little bit dry. When you're painting grass and trees together, keep in mind that grass is much lighter in value in general than, say, trees. In fact, skies and grass are some of the lightest values you'll find within the landscape. When I'm blocking in my painting, I generally keep my brushwork pretty loose, and then once it's dry I can then start adding details to it. And I can go as detailed or as loose as I like, but I like to have that loose base to start with as it gives life and vibrancy to the painting. The last thing I do to complete the blocking in stage is to paint the sunlit area of the barn. And this was mostly a mix of ultramarine blue with burnt sienna, titanium white and a little yellow oxide. Again, I vary the colours a little bit to create some texture within the side of the barn and communicate weatherboards. Overall, I want to keep the values in the barn a little bit darker so that I've got room to add highlights later on in the painting, and this applies to the other many elements within the scene, especially the trees as well. Lastly, I mark in the basic shape of the sheep. And again, I've used the same colours that I used in the background mountains and the clouds, and for the highlights I've used a mix of titanium white with a little bit of burnt sienna. Now at this point in the painting, the blocking in stage is complete, and it's here that I just want to check that everything is working. So far, am I happy with the colours and values within the scene, and does the painting read well? I've also overall kept the painting a little darker in value so that I've got plenty of room to add my lighter layers and my final highlights, which I'll be adding at the end of the painting, saving my lightest values until last. So it's here that I leave it to dry, and then I came back to it a few days later. So the painting here is dry, and I'm just going to really focus on the barn here. So there's obviously other areas of the painting that, especially in the background, that I started adding details to. But as I came to work on the barn, I'm using pretty much the same colours that I was using during the blocking in stage. Mostly a mix of ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, titanium white, and also a little bit of quinacridone crimson. And I'm adding some lighter layers to the roof here to add texture to it. I'm also using smaller brushes as well, a combination of number 3 flat brushes and number 3 filbert brushes. And filberts are really useful because you've got that nice rounded edge for finer marks, but you can also use the broad end of the brush as well. I'm painting in some of these metallic areas that are in shadow. And then I move on to the sunlit side of the barn where I start adding some highlights, and this is a mix of titanium white with some yellow oxide and a little bit of burnt sienna. I'm also using a number 0 round brush to apply the paint. Once I'd spent time working on the barn, it was well underway, and then I moved on to the other areas within the painting, which included again the Lombardy poplar trees, where I was adding lighter layers of paint to build up the form and definition within the trees, and then also working on the grass in the foreground. I worked over several sessions on this painting, building up lighter layers, especially within the trees and the grass in the foreground, until I got to a point where I was able to add my final details, and this is where I'll be adding my lightest values. This also includes the barn. I finish up the Lombardy poplar trees by adding a few final highlights to the tree canopies. And then I also add some highlights to the trunks of the trees, and this is a mix of titanium white with a little bit of yellow oxide and burnt sienna. Now the value of this colour is really light, and I'm able to use this same colour to just paint a few subtle highlights on those weatherboards on the sunlit side of the barn. When painting this barn, I made the brushwork fairly loose so that it looks old, and also some of the edges not completely straight either. Another thing I could have done was perhaps paint the roof so it was sunken in a little bit, and that also gives the illusion of an old looking building. Finally, I add the last highlights to the sheep and some of those network of branches in the gum tree next to the barn. It was here that I decided the painting was complete. Now if you enjoyed this video and would like to have a go at painting this yourself, then check out the link to the lesson notes that I've made for this video, which is on my website at samuelearp.com, and I've put the link in the description box below. If you'd like to see a full-length version of this video where I show you absolutely everything, how to paint this from start to finish, including mixing all the colours which I show on my palette, then you can watch this video by subscribing to me on Patreon for just $5 a month. And when you subscribe, you get instant access to all of my other videos on there as well, plus a new full-length painting tutorial video every month. I've put the link in the description box below. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Have a beautiful day, thanks for watching, and happy painting.